everybody, my name is Blink, and this is it, everybody. The final part of the Metroid Prime retrospective. It's been a long road, but we're here at last. And it's time for the last game in the trilogy. Let's do this.
While Metroid Prime 2 wasn't as much of a smash hit as the original Metroid Prime, it was still a financial success, selling nearly 500,000 copies in the 2 months following its release. Now, real quick, I said last time that I thought the reason for Echo's lower success was probably due to its unpopular game mechanics, but since then I've realized that there was probably something else at work. Something that may have been far more damaging to Prime 2's sales than anything else. Halo 2. Halo 2 released just weeks before Metroid Prime 2, and I don't think I need to explain how that might have impacted Echo's sales. I did want to mention that though. Who knows, maybe if Prime 2 had been released a year earlier or a year later, it wouldn't have been remembered as being so much of a black sheep.
Now, before we get to talking about Metroid Prime 3 though, I do have 2 other games I want to talk about real quick. These are 2 games that were released between Prime 2 and Prime 3 that also bore the name Metroid Prime.
Now, I'm not going to be talking about these games in any detail because, well, I've never played them. But there were 2 games released on the Nintendo DS between Metroid Prime 2 and 3. These 2 games were Metroid Prime Pinball, which came out in 2005, and Metroid Prime Hunters, which came out in 2006. Just let that sink in for a second. Metroid Prime Pinball. Yeah. Now, like I said, I've never played either one of these games, but what I can say is that from what I've heard, Metroid Prime Pinball is a decent enough pinball game, and Hunters had some great multiplayer back in its heyday, but the single player was really lackluster. For our purposes, it's enough for you guys to know that these games happen, and they sort of filled the gap between Prime 2 and Prime 3. Moving on, like we saw last time, Metroid Prime 3 Corruption was announced in 2005 and later delayed to a 2007 release for development reasons. But what was really interesting about Metroid Prime 3 was that it was bearing a heavy load of responsibility. The Nintendo Wii needed to prove itself, and while games like The Legend of Zelda Twilight Princess did a decent job of showing off the Wii's capabilities, the system didn't have a must-own title yet, unless you want to count Wii Sports. The Wii needed a killer app, a game that would establish the console as a home for games that not only were aimed at casual players, but at hardcore gamers as well. To do this, Metroid Prime 3 would have to be an extraordinary game, because the Wii needed a hero. Metroid Prime 3's gotta be strong, and it's gotta be fast, and it's gotta be fresh from the fight. We need a hero! We're holding out for a hero till the morning light. It's gotta be sure, and it's gotta be soon, and it's gotta be larger than life.
Sorry, I got a little carried away there. Man, Shrek 2's finale is great.
Anyways, when Metroid Prime 3 was finally released, it wasn't just the game that was being judged, it was the Wii console itself. Could Metroid Prime 3 live up to its predecessors and provide a gaming experience that could satisfy even the most hardcore Metroid fans? And could Metroid Prime 3 provide the Nintendo Wii the credibility it needed to be accepted as a top-notch video game console?
You know the drill by now. Let's play the game.
Metroid Prime 3 begins as the Galactic Federation summons Samus to rendezvous at the planet Norian, where they have a new mission assignment for her. Samus docks with the fleet and meets with Sergeant Johnson wannabe Admiral Dane. Dane has gathered together the galaxy's top bounty hunters, including Samus herself, for a special mission. The Galactic Federation has revamped their computer networks, replacing their old systems with organic supercomputers called Aurora units. The Aurora units are the key to maintaining galactic peace, but recently, Samus's old rivals, the Space Pirates, have begun infecting Aurora units with a powerful virus that puts the units offline. For some reason, rather than do the job themselves, the Galactic Federation has decided to send in bounty hunters to cure the Aurora units of the virus and get them operational again. Teaming up with Samus are 3 other bounty hunters: Gore, Rundus, and Gandreda. Gore is a pretty boring cyborg dude, Gandreda is an obnoxious shapeshifter chick, and Rundus is a freaking awesome ice warrior.
Ice, baby.
We've barely gotten the chance to meet any of them though, when suddenly the Space Pirates attack the GF fleet as well as the nearby planet of Norian. Samus and the other hunters spring into action to repel the Space Pirate attack, but then they get more bad news. There's a mysterious meteor headed straight for the planet, and they have to get the anti-air gun back online fast. But before they can get the gun operational, Samus encounters Ridley, who's been reconstructed after he was defeated back on Talon 4 in Prime 1. With Rundus' help, Samus escapes from Ridley, and the anti-air gun is brought back online. Samus and her fellow bounty hunters rush to activate the gun to destroy the meteor, but before they can pull the trigger, Dark Samus shows up and blasts them all, knocking them out and infecting them with Phazon. Just as she blacks out, Samus manages to hit the button to destroy the meteor, and the day is saved. But at what cost? 1 month later, Samus comes out of her coma and learns that since the attack on Norian, a ton of stuff has gone down. 2 other meteors have crash landed on the planets of Brio and Elysia, and Rundus, Gore, and Gandreda have all set off on missions to save the day, equipped with new GF technology called a PED suit, which Samus has been given as well. It turns out that Samus and her fellow bounty hunters were all infected with a special type of Phazon, which has caused their bodies to start self-producing Phazon. The PED suit can harness the power of that Phazon, releasing it through weaponry and powerful blasts. This seems to be really great at first, but mysteriously, the other hunters have all gone missing, and their missions have been left incomplete. It also turns out that the meteors that have been striking nearby planets are the same sort of meteors as the ones that struck Talon 4 and Aether, and they carry powerful Phazon infections within them that could take over entire planets. These meteors, called Leviathan Seeds, must be destroyed at all costs to prevent the galaxy from becoming corrupted by Phazon.
Told you it was a pattern. But you didn't believe me. Did you?
Now it's up to Samus to travel to the nearby planets, find the missing hunters, cure the Aurora units of the virus, and destroy the Leviathan Seeds before they have a chance to spread the corruption of Phazon across the entire galaxy.
Now, before we move on to Prime 3's presentation, I do want to bring up a really big issue that I have with this game. Because you're interacting with other characters so much, it removes a really strong sense of isolation that the first two games in the trilogy had. And the sense of isolation was so important to Prime and Prime 2 in building that atmosphere of fear and loneliness and isolation, and it just made the games what they were. It makes Metroid to have isolation. And the problem is that in Prime 3, you're interacting with other characters so much that you really lose a lot of that sense of isolation, and that really cuts into the atmosphere in an unfortunate way. Now, as you can probably tell, Prime 3 is a huge game. In fact, there's almost double the environments in Corruption as there are in either Prime or Prime 2. There's a whopping 9 environments in Prime 3 to explore, across 5 separate unique planets. Now, the first two games may have had great presentation, but those were on the GameCube. Now, the GameCube may have rocked it, but will the Wii rock you?
That was just terrible.
That wasn't that bad.
I'm revoking your awesome card.
I like being awesome.
Whew, we have a lot of environments to cover here, so let's blast through. First up, there's Norian, the first planet in the game. All of our time on Norian is spent in a Galactic Federation military base, which is your typical silver gray technological sci-fi building. Next up, there's Brio, a planet which was once the home of a powerful alien civilization which is now in ruins. Brio has a few different regions, including a jungle, ice caverns, and fiery tunnels. Skytown on the planet Elysia is next, and holy crap, Skytown. I love this place so much. It's an ancient floating Chozo city in the clouds with zip lines, morph ball cannons, and all sorts of chances to use the screw attack. It's such a cool environment, and I always love traveling around in Skytown. Later on, we travel to the Space Pirate homeworld, which is interesting, but a little too neon for my tastes. It's sort of like Dark Aether, Sanctuary Fortress, and the Phazon Mines had a baby. Lots of chances to sneak around though, which is fun. Then there's the wrecked spaceship, the Valhalla, which reminds me a lot of the friggin' Orpheon from the first game actually. There's lots of destruction and creepiness to explore through, and even a jump scare or two. There's one more planet to talk about as well, but it doesn't come until the very end of the game, so I'll wait to talk about it for a bit. The environments in Metroid Prime 3 are all beautifully realized using the power of the Wii console. The Wii may not have been the most technically impressive console of the last generation, but man, developers sure can make beautiful stuff on the Wii, and Metroid Prime 3 is no exception. It feels like the natural evolution of the Metroid Prime graphical style. Everything is so much more detailed than in the previous games. I'm personally not the biggest fan of all the design choices. I'm not a fan of how bright all the colors are, and like I mentioned before, sometimes playing the game feels like I'm swimming through neon. But that's a personal preference, and it doesn't detract from how freaking great everything truly looks. The graphics are awesome, all things considered. The music on the whole is solid as well, but I'm sad to say that, to me, it doesn't beat out the first two games. Don't get me wrong, it's still great music, and some of the themes are excellent, but there's no single song from the game, except maybe the main menu theme, that ever really sticks in my head the way that Torvus Bog, Vendrina Drifts, or Sanctuary Fortress do. But I'll let you decide for yourself what you think. Here's a few examples.
See what I mean? Now, the music is really good, but it just doesn't have the same kind of staying power that the music in the first two games did. Maybe that's just me, though.
While we owe Metroid Prime 3's being on the Wii console for the better graphics, we also owe the Wii console for something else in this game, and this is a biggie. The controls. For the first time, we control Samus entirely through motion controls using the Wii Remote and Nunchuck, and on the whole, Retro Studios hit the ball out of the park with this control scheme. It's very simple and easy to understand the controls. You aim and turn using the Wii Remote's pointer, you move with the control stick on the Nunchuck, and so on. If there's one issue I have with this control scheme, it's that at times it can feel gimmicky. Usually, actions like swinging the Nunchuck to control your grapple beam and flicking the Wii Remote to jump in Morph Ball mode are fun and accurate, but at times the game likes to overuse the motion control idea. Big time. There's a ton of different minigame-esque motion control mechanics throughout the game that you have to complete to progress, and after I've done each one a couple of times, they just start feeling super gimmicky and reducing rather than increasing how immersed I feel in the game. The other major new change that Prime 3 brings to the table is Hyper Mode, the Super Saiyan phase-on-field high damage state that you can activate using Samus's new PED suit. At first, Hyper Mode is freaking awesome. It's incredibly powerful, allowing you to destroy any enemy that gets in your way with ease, and over the course of the game, you unlock new abilities that make you even more ridiculously overpowered when you're in Hyper Mode. Sounds great, right? Well, it is. Kind of. Let me explain. You can activate Hyper Mode at any time by pressing the plus button, as long as you have enough health. See, Hyper Mode costs 1 full energy tank per use, which means that you're sacrificing health for higher damage. At first glance, this is a really interesting system, and you'd think it would lead to some really tense moments within the gameplay where you're making a desperate gamble with your health in order to gain the extra firepower you need to defeat an enemy. But in reality, it's nowhere near that dramatic because Hyper Mode is incredibly easy to abuse. First of all, whenever you're in Hyper Mode, you're essentially invincible. It is possible to die in Hyper Mode because the more damage you take, the more corrupted you become, until eventually you die from phase-on overload. But the thing is, it's very unlikely that this will ever happen because to keep from overloading, you just have to fire your weapons, which you'll be doing anyway when you're in Hyper Mode. So effectively, getting damaged in Hyper Mode just gives you more ammunition to kill enemies with, meaning that until the timer runs out, you're pretty much an indestructible walking tank obliterating everything in your path. Second of all, enemies drop a ton of health in this game, all the time. So usually, the moment you come out of Hyper Mode, there will be a ton of health pickups scattered all around you from the enemies you just killed, meaning that that energy tank you spent to get into Hyper Mode in the first place basically never went away. All this put together means that at any time you can go into God Mode and destroy everything in your path, usually with no consequences whatsoever. This is a big problem because it completely removes the challenge of beating the game. Fighting a group of tough enemies? Hyper Mode. Fighting a boss? Hyper Mode. Sick and tired of feeling like you're all alone in the world? Hyper Mode. It's just so easy to abuse Hyper Mode that unlike the first two games in the trilogy, Metroid Prime 3 is extremely easy. Even the toughest encounters in the game can be over in seconds as long as you have the extra energy tank to spare. This really ruins any sense of true tension the game might have otherwise had, and that's a shame, because part of what made the atmospheres of Prime 1 and Prime 2 so incredible was their sense of danger and excitement. Prime 3 never comes close to that same level of atmospheric immersion, and Hyper Mode is the biggest reason for that.
Hyper Mode may be the biggest addition to Samus's arsenal in Prime 3, but it's certainly not the only one.
All of Samus's classic items are back, from the missile launcher to the screw attack, but Prime 3 does bring in some cool new additions. Let's start with the grapple lasso. In previous games, the grapple beam only allowed Samus to swing across gaps, and while that ability does return in Prime 3, the grapple lasso is what you'll be using most of the time, to move things, grab enemies, rip stuff off of walls, and eventually even channel energy to or from whatever you're grappled onto to activate switches, regain health, or kill enemies.
Come to think of it, whipping the grapple lasso is one of the things in the motion controls I have the most fun with. I mean, it's a really small detail, but it's just a lot of fun to whip my lasso back and forth. Uh-oh.
Hop right out the ship, get a lock on. Give no mercy to them space pirates because I'm whipping on. And I'm not taking any flack, ain't no skin off my back. I'm just here to drop the bomb, so keep on trying to stop me, I'll cruise on. Yeah! Pirates upgrading shields and armor, I grapple every one of them and just rip them off. Rip them off, rip them off, rip them off. Won't let no pirates slow me down now. I'm a burning bomb, this spot like boom loud. I'm a bounty hunter, Samus Aran, Stone Cold killer with a beating heart of gold. I whip my lasso back and forth. 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 I whip my
Next up are the ice missiles, which upgrade your normal missiles to be able to freeze stuff. You mainly use them in Brio Fire to make platforms for yourself across the molten fuel gel, but you can freeze enemies too. Remember how I said that there were different upgrades we could get for hyper mode? Well, some of the upgrades take the place of items from previous games in the series. For example, the hyper missiles are pretty much just the super missiles, but you can only use them in hyper mode. The hyper ball is a super powerful blast of phazon electricity that auto attacks everything around you, and the hyper grapple lets you channel phazon energy through your grapple lasso to open secret passages. Once again, there are multiple visors available to us in Prime 3. The combat visor and the scan visor are functionally pretty much the same as they were in Prime 2, minus some aesthetic changes. The X-ray visor returns from Prime 1, doing pretty much the same stuff it did before. The only new visor Prime 3 adds to the mix is the ship command visor. For the first time ever, we get to control Samus's ship in a Metroid game. Sadly though, we don't get to fly it ourselves. We do, however, get to use the ship to help us out. Throughout the game, there are landing pads that we can have our ship land on where we can save the game and get our ammo restored all at once. This is awesome because in both Prime and Prime 2, Samus's ship stayed in one place for the whole game. So if you ever wanted to restore your ammo for free, you had to trek all the way back to where your ship was, which could become a huge inconvenience. In Prime 3 though, it's almost more common to use your ship as a save station than it is to use an actual save station, which is kind of awesome. There's other things that the ship can do as well. First off, there's the ship grapple, which allows us to use the ship to pick up enormous objects in the world to solve puzzles. This is especially useful in Skytown. Ship missiles are the other upgrade we can get for our ship, allowing us to order Samus's ship to do a bombing run. This may seem really awesome, but outside of the couple of times you're required to do this to progress in the story, there's very little use for the ship missiles because they are only usable in very wide open rooms, of which there are very few in the game. This makes sense, but it's a shame too. It could have been a lot of fun to do bombing runs on enemies all the time, but then again, who needs to be more overpowered, right? When it comes to beams, things are a bit different this time around. In Prime and Prime 2, you ended up with 4 beams that had different effects, and you could switch back and forth between them to use the right weapon at the right time. This brought a really cool element of strategy to the first 2 games, especially in Prime 2 where you had a limited ammo supply. But Prime 3 throws all that out, replacing the multiple beam system with a stacked beam system that the classic Metroid titles had. Essentially, each new beam stacks onto the last one, so there's no strategy involved in your choice of weapon. As always, we start out with the power beam, which pretty much works exactly the same way it did in the first 2 games. Later on, we upgrade to the plasma beam, which is much more powerful and can melt through certain materials. Finally, on the Space Pirate homeworld, we get the Nova beam, which is even more powerful than the plasma beam, and it adds the ability to shoot through certain materials when used in combination with the X-ray visor. This is freaking awesome, because you can use this ability to kill certain enemies instantly by using the X-ray visor to see their weak spot, then blasting it directly with the Nova beam. This is one of the most satisfying feelings in the entire trilogy, especially when you get to kill a Metroid Hatcher this way toward the very end of the game. By this point, you've fought 2 Metroid Hatchers already, and they were very tough opponents, but with the X-ray visor and the Nova beam, you can take it out in one hit. So freaking awesome! In Prime and Prime 2, there were multiple suit upgrades that Samus would get over the course of her journey, each of which would give her new abilities. Unfortunately, that's not the case anymore in Prime 3. While we start out the game wearing the Various suit, we get upgraded to the PED suit very early on, which unlocks Hyper Mode. And while the look of the PED suit changes over the course of the game to reflect how corrupted by phazon Samus is becoming, we don't get another major upgrade until the game's final third when we travel to the Space Pirate homeworld. It's there that we get the Hazard suit, which basically just protects us from hazardous conditions like acid rain and molten fuel gel by giving us goofy looking shoulder pads. It's a shame that we don't get more cool suits, but hey, what are you gonna do? Speaking of the Space Pirate homeworld, the Space Pirates are back once again in Prime 3, and they've gotten some huge upgrades.
I'm gonna show you how to mow the lawn.
There's a few new types of pirates, including armored and shielded varieties, as well as the enormous Berserker Lords, which show up as occasional mini-bosses. Besides the Space Pirates, almost all the enemies we face in Prime 3 are brand new, even though there are plenty of callbacks to enemies from the first 2 games. All of these enemies are interesting in their designs and the strategies you have to use to fight them. For example, the Reptilicus enemies on Brio can teleport around a room and you have to keep an eye on where they are at all times. In Skytown, there are a bunch of steampunk robots to fight. I really love the designs of the robots. I've had a soft spot for the look of steampunk for a long time, and now that I think about it, Metroid Prime 3 may be a reason why. My favorite of all these robot enemies are the Tin Bots, because you can use the boost ball to bowl them all over. It's super satisfying. Something I think is really cool about the enemy designs in Prime 3 is how well the motion controls are implemented into combat. Whether you're ripping shields away from space pirates with the grapple lasso, or using the pointer to target the shoulder pads of a berserker lord, these little touches really add to the immersion of the game in a way that a gimmicky minigame could never do. It's one of those great design choices that really improves the quality of Prime 3 as a game. Of course, Metroids return again in Prime 3, but sadly they're very underused. In fact, they appear so seldom in the game that they sort of feel tacked on just because Metroid games are supposed to have Metroids. Which is fine, I suppose, but it would have been nice to see them utilized more heavily in the game. But one thing that is awesome about the Metroids in Prime 3 is the sequence where you first encounter them in Skytown. I remember that the first time I ever played Metroid Prime 3, this part of the game where you first encounter Metroids was genuinely creepy to me, and it still stands out to me as one of Prime 3's best moments. Eventually, Samus finds the missing bounty hunters, only to discover that they've been totally corrupted by Phazon and have gone insane, meaning we have no choice but to defeat them. These are some of the most unique boss encounters in the game, but again, thanks to Hyper Mode, they're total pushovers. When we defeat each bounty hunter, a cutscene plays that's supposed to make us feel really sad about their fate, but honestly, it does nothing for me. Except maybe for Rundus. The big problem with the bounty hunters in Corruption is that none of them are ever developed into characters that I, as the player, care about. Rundus is given the most development, but that's just because he has the most screen time. Neither Gore nor Gandrada are characters I care about or even like. They're just so flat and obnoxious, I don't give a crap that they're dead. They just feel so formulaic. Even Rundus, who's the coolest of the bunch, is only interesting because we see him do the most interesting stuff. His is the only bounty hunter boss fight that really matters to me, at least on an emotional level. Each of the bounty hunters uses their unique abilities in their boss battles to try and defeat Samus in different ways. But I think my favorite has to be the fight against Gore. Before the battle, your ship starts sending you distress signals that it's being attacked, so you rush to stop the attacker. When you finally reach the ship, Gore is wailing on it with his giant mech suit, and he literally throws the ship at you.
I'm not sure if I should be terrified or just laugh.
The goal of this battle is to knock Gore's mech suit out of commission, which isn't very hard. It is a memorable fight to me though, and I think it's one of the few truly awesome boss fights in the game. The most powerful bosses in the entire game are the ones guarding the Leviathan seeds. Each of these fights is like a giant puzzle, though some of those puzzles aren't exactly difficult. The thing that I love most about these Leviathan seed boss fights is that after each boss is defeated and you've gotten each new item as a reward, Samus's body overloads with Phazon, leading to one of the most flat-out awesome sequences in the entire trilogy. And speaking of boss fights, remember how in Metroid Prime 2 there were a few bosses that brought up some massive difficulty spikes and how all the bosses were challenging to fight? Well, say goodbye to all that because in Prime 3 the bosses are super easy. Once again, this is mostly thanks to Hyper Mode, but not entirely. A lot of them are very big pushovers or have big flashing vulnerable spots, which sure, the first two games had as well, but not nearly as much as this. Most of the bosses get torn apart like tissue paper by Hyper Mode's firepower as well. And thanks to the fact that using Hyper Mode is basically no consequences, that means that Prime 3 is the easiest game in the trilogy by a long shot. Now again, that's not necessarily a bad thing, and in fact I think that's what Retro Studios was going for. Metroid Prime 3 is a game for people who have never played a Metroid game before. It's meant to pull in beginners and veterans alike, and it succeeds in doing so. And to be fair, there is an unlockable Hyper Mode difficulty for players who want an extra challenge, but it's unlockable. You have to beat the game at least once to gain access to Hyper Mode difficulty, so your first experience with the game is likely to be an absolute breeze. This is just a shame to me because I remember my first experiences, even on normal difficulty, with the first and second Metroid Prime games as a kid being extremely brutal, frightening, and deeply challenging experiences. I really wish that more people could experience Prime 3 in that same way. With all that said though, let's get back to the story. With the 3 Leviathan seeds on Brio, Elysia, and the Space Pirate homeworld destroyed, we discover that there's one final planet we haven't explored yet, Phase, the source of all Phazon, the place where all the Leviathan seeds have been coming from for the entire trilogy. The problem is, Phase is too far away in deep space for us to reach by conventional methods. To stop the spread of Phazon forever, we have to use a wormhole. Lucky for us, there just happens to be a Leviathan seed spaceship that has the capability to create a wormhole orbiting the Space Pirate homeworld, but we can't use it immediately. We first have to upload a special code to the ship to allow us to pilot it. The code is aboard the GFS Valhalla, a GF ship that was destroyed in a Space Pirate attack months ago. Upon arriving arriving at the Valhalla though, we discover there's no way we can fully explore the ship because we need energy cells.
See where this is going?
Yup, you guessed it. Energy cells are the Chozo artifacts and Sky Temple keys of Prime 3. Now, at first glance, this is really frustrating because, I mean, who liked collecting those things in the first 2 games? Anybody? That's what I thought. Fortunately though, the energy cells in Prime 3 are the least annoying MacGuffins in the trilogy, because throughout the game so far, it's likely you've already collected a few of them. On top of that, you actually aren't required to collect all the energy cells to beat the game, because a few of them are just used to unlock optional areas on the Valhalla to get collectibles. So if you're not going for 100%, you'll have an even easier time of it. And speaking of 100% completion, Metroid Prime 3 added a few new features that a completionist might care about. Now, in the first 2 games, 100% completion was based on 2 factors: the number of important scans you collected, and, of course, collecting all of the optional collectibles. But in Prime 3, new features were added because of the Wii's online connectivity. Throughout the game, you'll unlock little tokens called credits for completing certain actions. Getting valuable scans, beating bosses, solving certain puzzles, pretty much every important thing you do will get you credits. There's even some special credits that you can only get by connecting with the Friends game over the Wii's online feature. You can use all these credits to unlock art galleries, songs from the game's soundtrack, and even bobbleheads for your ship. At the end of the day, the whole credit system isn't all that interesting, but hey, at least it's something.
So, we've destroyed all the Leviathan seeds, we've gotten all the collectibles, we've fully explored the Valhalla with the energy cells. There's really only one thing left to do. It's time to finish this fight, once and for all.
Using the Leviathan code to pilot the Leviathan seed ship, Samus leads the GF fleet through a wormhole to Phase, where a massive space pirate ambush awaits. Samus slips through the dogfight to the planet's surface, but as soon as she arrives, her suit overloads with Phazon, making her totally corrupted. That means that from now on, we're perpetually in hyper mode, and all of our energy tanks get turned into a single life bar of Phazon power. Phase is an interesting planet, and I know a lot of people like this place, but honestly, to me, it's nothing special. I'm sorry, it just doesn't hold the same kind of eerie power that the Impact Crater did in the original Metroid Prime or that Dark Aether held in Prime 2. The only thing I really find cool about Phase is the fact that because we're in hyper mode for the rest of the game, we're pretty much on a time limit before we die. So this section of the game is just a big old race to the finish line. And you know what that means! At long last, it's time for the final showdown against Dark Samus. She pretty much just acts like she did in Prime 2, and she's really easy to bring down because, once again, we're in hyper mode. But once we beat Dark Samus, the fight's not quite over. It turns out that when the space pirates attacked the GFS Valhalla, they stole the ship's Aurora unit, and now it's here in Phase's core, completely corrupted by Phazon and possessed by Dark Samus, and it's up to us to bring it down and save the galaxy. I wish I could say this final boss fight was as satisfying as the ones in Prime and Prime 2, but I just can't. Both phases of the battle are just so incredibly easy to beat that it's really sort of a joke. There's just so little challenge to it that it ends up feeling kind of anticlimactic, sadly. Once we beat the Aurora unit, Dark Samus is destroyed once and for all, Phase explodes, ending the threat of Phazon forever, and the GF fleet escapes through the wormhole.
Sir, we've confirmed the wormhole has disappeared. All the Leviathans are gone. The crisis is over.
What about Samus?
Negative, sir. No contact.
And of course, in the most shocking reveal of all time, Samus managed to escape Phase before it exploded. The galaxy is saved, Samus's mission is complete, and if you got a high enough completion percentage, she heads off to Skytown to mourn the loss of her fellow bounty hunters. Yeah, I still feel nothing. Once that's done, she takes off her suit, looking just as anime as ever, and flies off into space, her mission complete. But if you got 100% completion...
Continue?
So that's it. Metroid Prime 3 Corruption complete. That's the third game in the trilogy done, which means this retrospective is finished. Almost.
Metroid Prime 3 is a great game, don't get me wrong, and I've enjoyed myself every time I play it. But honestly, this is the biggest mixed bag in the trilogy for me. Sure, the graphics are much improved, but the neon-infused color palette isn't appealing to me. The motion controls are fluid and excellently realized, but they get bogged down in gimmicky minigames way too often. The game's world is bigger than ever before, with double the number of environments to explore than the previous games, but the lack of any real challenge castrates Corruption's atmospheric qualities and removes a huge huge chunk of what made the environments of the first two games feel so incredible, the sense of danger. So yes, Corruption is a great game, a fantastic game even, and it did the job it came to do by both giving Wii owners their first hardcore gaming experience on the Wii, and at the same time proving that the Nintendo Wii could stand on its own merit as a great console. I really enjoy and respect Metroid Prime 3, but I would hesitate to say that I love it in the same way I love the first two games in the trilogy. Some of the magic is missing. What made Prime and Prime 2 such magnificent gaming experiences wasn't their control schemes, graphics, combat, and puzzle solving, although all those things are certainly important and they contributed. The thing that makes the first two games so great is the pervasively immersive, dangerously tense, and profoundly lonely atmospheres that each game held so masterfully.
With all that said, here we are with the entire trilogy behind us. Now the real question is, and this is the one that's really tough, which of these games do I think is the best one in the trilogy? I mean, dang, that's a really hard one to decide. But you know, even though I love Prime and Prime 2 in equal measure, if I was forced to choose between them, I'd have to choose Metroid Prime 2.
It may be the black sheep of the trilogy, but I absolutely love Echoes. Its darker atmosphere, increased difficulty, and limited ammunition all combine to make Echoes a truly incredible Metroid experience. So to sum up, here's how I would rank the trilogy. Number 1, Metroid Prime 2 Echoes. Number 2, the classic Metroid Prime. And number 3, Metroid Prime 3 Corruption. Again though, Echoes and Prime 1 are pretty much neck and neck for me.
But that's just what I think. How did other people react to Metroid Prime 3?
When Metroid Prime 3 Corruption released, it was a smash hit, especially when compared to Prime 2. By the end of 2007, it had sold over 1 million copies, and gamers everywhere loved it. I remember being so excited to get Prime 3 that when the review came out in Nintendo Power, I read it over and over and over again, psyched out by its perfect 10 rating and gorgeous looking screenshots.
You know, looking back on it, Metroid Prime 3 was a really special game to me. And while I may judge the game a lot more harshly now that I'm older, 15-year-old me was in love with this game. I mean, it was an incredible experience. It was beautiful graphics. It was an amazing story. It was a great finale. I mean, I really had a blast with this game. And I just really hope that even though I have a harsher opinion of this game and I don't feel it matches up to the first two in the trilogy, I really hope that doesn't turn you off from this game at all, because really it is an incredible game. And it was a very special game to me personally when I was a kid.
Metroid Prime 3 may have been the end of the trilogy, but it wasn't the end of the Metroid series. In 2009, a remastered compilation of all 3 games in the trilogy was released, simply called Metroid Prime Trilogy. I used to own this compilation, and I've experienced both versions of all 3 games. The Trilogy Edition gives Prime and Prime 2 the same motion controls from Prime 3, and they work really well for the most part. The games were also remastered and given new aspect ratios, allowing for widescreen play, which is really freaking nice. These days, the Trilogy Edition is super rare, and it can be really pricey, but it's well worth the investment to play all 3 games in such a solid package. If you don't feel like shelling out $100 though, you can always pick up the original versions of all 3 games for pretty cheap, and personally, I actually prefer playing the first 2 games with their original GameCube controls, but that's just me. Since the Metroid Prime trilogy came to a conclusion, there's only been one Metroid game released, Metroid Other M. And oh boy, Other M. Let's just say it's a controversial game and leave it there. For now. I'll probably get around to talking about Other M at some point, but for now, this is where our journey ends. It's been 4 years since the last Metroid game released, and in that time, we've gotten nothing but radio silence from Nintendo about the series. I really hope that we'll see a new, fully realized Metroid game before the Wii U's life cycle is completed, and personally, I really hope it's in the same first-person style as the Prime trilogy. I guess we'll just have to wait and see what happens, though.
Well, that just about wraps it up. I have to say, these 3 videos, this retrospective, is so far the most labor-intensive project I've ever done on this channel, and I really hope that it paid off, that you guys really enjoyed these videos. But I guess with all that said, that's the end of this retrospective, everybody. So until next time, keep your spirits up and your HP high.
Hey everybody, thanks so much for watching this retrospective. It took so much time and so much work to put these 3 videos together. I mean, truly hundreds and hundreds of hours to put these videos together and script and edit and film and everything I did for them. And I really, really hope that that all paid off, that you guys really enjoyed the videos. And I really feel like I was able to really express my love for this trilogy of games in these videos. I don't think these are the only videos I'll ever make about the Prime trilogy, but for now, I think this will be it. I do have other things I want to say and other things I'd love to talk about in other videos in the future about the Prime trilogy, but we'll see what happens. Anyway, thank you so much for watching, everybody, and I really am sorry that this video took so long to get out. It just was a really long process to script it. It was a very difficult video to script and put together, and I'm just really glad that it's finished now. Anyway, thank you so much for watching, everybody. I really appreciate it, and I really hope you guys liked it. And if you did, if you'd leave a thumbs up down below, and if you haven't already, if you'd subscribe to my channel for more videos in the future, that'd be super, super awesome. Also, as a quick side note, now that the whole trilogy of retrospectives is done, it would be so, so cool if you guys wouldn't mind helping me get these 3 videos out there. Just, I'd put a lot of work into them, and I'd love people to see them, and especially people who haven't ever experienced the Metroid games. One of my goals was that these would be great introductions to the series for people, especially for people to play the original 2 Metroid Prime games, and it'd just be really awesome if you could spread these around for me. That'd be really, really cool. Thank you so much in advance. And if you haven't seen them yet, you can click on one of these 2 videos right here to see part 1 and part 2 of this Prime Trilogy retrospective. Thanks so much again, everybody. This is Blake signing out. Keep your spirits up and your HP high.